Hey everyone, we're back with Dark Souls, some sequence breaking going on. Just upgrading our stats slowly but surely. I'll explain the build once we actually get a little closer to it. Obviously I mentioned that this is going to be sorcery focused and we haven't really done any sorcery yet. First though, we're going to reinforce our Estus class to +2. It's theoretically possible to get the third soul that's down in the part of Blighttown with all the Blowdart guys. But if you do that, then Anastasia will die unless you've killed Lothric in the parish, something we haven't done yet. Heading back to the parish, I'm going to go ahead and fight one of these Balder Knights while the channeler up on the balcony there snipes at me. I have something special prepared for him, and he's a non-respawner. The Balder Knights that have the longer swords and the triangular shields have some of the more interesting drops in this area. I won't actually farm for them on camera if I do, but I will show them off when and if I actually get them. There's actually two kinds of Balder Knights. There's the ones with Balder shields, which are the large shields, and Balder side swords, which are the swords they're wielding. And then there's the ones with rapiers and bucklers. They can both actually parry you, so although the rapier ones might seem like the ones that actually do parrying, it is actually possible to be parried by both. In fact, the rapier ones have a more obvious parrying stance, so it's actually a little bit easier, I think, to deal with them. Gonna kill these guys just because. Head down to Andre's because I need to save at the bonfire just in case. We'll cut most of that out. And head on back to the parish. This time we're going to be going through the parish, but obviously since we've never been here before, what we're going to be doing is going through it for the very first time backwards. That's not that interesting, except that a lot of enemies are going to be facing away from us, which gives us the opportunity to ambush them. Again, these hollow soldiers can be a pain in the butt, but a lot of them can be circled around behind. The ones that aren't spear users tend to try and attack you, which leaves them wide open. The spear users will turn pretty tightly, but it is possible to circle around them quickly enough to get in a backstab. Baiting their attack or kicking them is probably a better way, but that doesn't mean that it's not viable to do it the other way. Even though, as you'll see coming up, it's not exactly the most elegant thing that I do here. We're going to be approaching those Balder Knights. And back. Even if you're quiet, they will hear you as you get right up to them. If you have heavier armor, they will turn around pretty much before you get into backstab range. But even with light armor, you do make some sound, and they will actually turn around at the very last second. You can backstab them from far enough out that this isn't going to be a problem, though. If you have very light armor, or you're silent through magical means or the Dragon Crest ring, you can actually pretty much just walk up right behind them and stand there. They won't hear you at all. So even though you can't necessarily hear your footsteps, you are generating sound, unless you've actually intentionally silenced yourself with the Hush Sorcery or Dragon Crest ring. The spear is not necessarily always the best choice to actually fight these spear guys, especially when they get in here and start shield bashing. Shield bashes take an enormous amount of stamina out from you, even if you block them. I'm not sure if that's actually true for your own shield bashes if you use great shields. There are certain things that do a surprising amount of poise damage to enemies, things you might not immediately expect, but we don't really have access to most of them right now. We've skipped that fog door, which is skippable anyway if you are quick and run back through this gate, which was not my intention, but hey, since we're here. Oh dear. And one of them closes the gate, which is actually useful because that means those archers are not going to get us. While we're sitting here dancing around with these guys, it's a good time to talk about the whole shield thing. These guys have hollow soldier shields, which, as you can see, they recoil a little bit off us, and we recoil a little bit off them. As I was mentioning in the last video, the deflection property of certain shields determines how fast you bounce off. There is another property, though, one that's a little bit more interesting and equally undocumented, which is parrying. You may be familiar with, if you've seen some of the other videos or just any other videos, that certain shields in Dark Souls can parry, and then the great shields cannot. They can do a shield bash, but they don't parry. Every other shield has the ability to parry, but not all parrying is created equal. There are multiple kinds of parrying, and most medium shields, which are the heaviest shields that can parry, have a pretty basic parrying animation, but the lighter shields have a faster one. It's got a quicker come out, and it comes on a little bit differently in timing. Some people find it actually easier to parry with the regular medium shields, but if you're redirecting quickly to an attack, the smaller shields actually give you an advantage there. But of course you might be wondering, well, that's great, but the smaller shields have terrible deflection and terrible stability. Why would I want to use one of those? Well, there's something funny about that, which I will describe in just a moment, but first we got to take care of this guy. Feather arrows are nice because they have a good travel time. Unfortunately, in shooting this guy, we ended up attracting the attention of the boar. The boar is actually not a huge threat, but if he hits you straight on and you're not blocking and you're not at full health, you'll certainly get plowed through. This one is not as dangerous as certain boars later in the game. It has a lot less health, but it has an annoying property where anywhere but the rump is heavily armored, and most physical attacks will just bounce off. Real pain. There is, however, a very cheap way to deal with this boar, and it involves this can that happens to be on fire, and you can see that Hollow Soldier just died, even though he was healing himself. And the reason for that is, you can see from the health bar on the boar there, walking into fire does in fact damage enemies. I've been knocked down here, I'm just going to let myself stay knocked down for a bit, because the boar is healing himself, and there he goes. You don't need to actually fight him, although if you want to, you can abuse that entry area. The boar will turn around when you're at the stairs, and you can just run up and backstab it. And for whatever reason, you can backstab boars, even though most large enemies can't be backstabbed. I don't know exactly why that is. Going back to shields, the light shields are actually weight-based. There is one medium shield that actually has the fast parry animation, and the reason for that is that it's based on weight. Any shield that is lighter than 3 weight has the fast parry animation, but of course this affects mostly only the light shields. There is one exception though, and that's the warrior starting shield, the heater shield, which is that kite shield that's just kind of metallic and banged up. It's actually a very low weight shield compared to other 100% physical block shields, so it can still block 100% of physical damage. And more interestingly, it has the fast parry animation, while also being a medium deflection shield. So that's kind of a cool trait to it, and it's actually a shield that you shouldn't overlook. Even though it's very cheap, it's actually pretty effective if weight is a problem with your build. And if you have low endurance, or it's early in the game, or you just have a lot of heavy weaponry or armor, the heater shield is something to consider. It doesn't have very good resistances to everything else, but most of the time when you're looking at a shield, you're just looking at 100% physical block. Plus, the ability to parry better than most medium shields is just a bonus. One that a lot of people don't even notice. There are 2 special light shields and a parrying dagger, which have a special parry animation. It gives you a longer window to actually do the parry, but strangely enough, it has a longer recovery animation, so the faster shield parry is in some ways preferable. Unless you just really want that better window. But it's probably better to just practice with a regular shield, even just a regular medium shield, to get that parry window down. Or you can just be like me and not bother with parrying. In which case, you probably want to use the Great Shield, because you're not losing anything from doing it. Now, we've actually made it to the shortcut into the lower Undead Burg, or the main Undead Burg here. We have not actually entered it from the main entrance there. We haven't gone through the first fog door, and there's something very interesting that happens when we don't do that, and I'll see what that is in a bit, but I don't want to spoil it. The enemies here are a lot easier than the ones we have been fighting, because this is an area we were supposed to have been in first. But approaching it from this angle, we've picked up a lot more stuff, we're a lot better prepared. We can get the items here, although most of them obviously aren't going to be as good as the things we found already, or else there wouldn't have been much point going that way to begin with. Now, with these spear guys, as I said, if you go around them tightly enough, you actually can get around them. But you can also just bait their attacks or kick them. You're also completely invincible in a parry or riposte animation, which is actually pretty useful, because most enemies will try to attack you and get stuck in a recovery frame just as you're popping out of your own animation. If you're not careful, it could potentially be dangerous, but for the most part, it's usually at advantage in a cluster of enemies. They'll waste their time attacking, and then you can just roll out after the animation's done. The male undead merchant down here has a couple of useful items, including the orange soapstone in the bottom of this box. We're also getting the residence key because we want to do our actual sorcery stuff, and perhaps just as important, we're going to get some large arrows and a number of standard arrows.
Thank you,
The large arrow only appears to have a slight bit of advantage over the standard arrow. It's about a few points more damage, but it actually will tend to do a lot more damage than a standard arrow, and especially more than a wooden arrow. That's because of a hidden property that bows have, just like how shields have their own hidden properties that aren't documented, bows do as well. There's a range mentioned on the bow, and you might not know what that factor means, but basically it refers to the amount of time that an arrow will fly before it starts really losing out on damage. The closer you are to something when you shoot it with an arrow, the more damage is dealt. So the better arrows actually fly farther as well. It's a property of basically of additional range they have. The feather arrow has a lot of range, but the large arrow's higher damage sort of makes up for it. Generally, large arrows are what you want to go for. Now here we are up on the Drake Bridge, but you'll notice there's something conspicuously absent from the Drake Bridge, namely the Drake. Here we are up on the bridge. This is the first time we've ever climbed up onto this, and the Drake is nowhere to be found. Nobody breathing fire, nobody flying over us. I found this out by accident one run, and I was worried that I had actually glitched out the game and that the Drake was gone, and that going this way through the parish first had actually caused the Drake to not spawn, and that he never would. I tried going in and out every which way, and I just could not get it to spawn. Well, it turns out there is a way to make the Drake spawn, and it's actually the only way to make the Drake spawn. And the reason why we haven't seen it is because we haven't actually triggered the trigger that causes the Drake to come to the bridge. Most people don't even realize there is a trigger, because every time they get to the bridge for the first time, the Drake is there. We will see that in just a bit. But while we're here, we can come up here and get the items, and trigger the bonfire and open the gate to the parish near the sunlight altar. The Claymore that you find on the bridge is one of the better weapons in the game. It was nerfed a bit going into the PC version. Originally it had a slightly faster recovery time on its two-handed combo, which allowed you to stun lock a number of enemies, and it's unfortunate that I can't show this off because it was actually pretty useful in areas that are later in the game. There are a number of surprisingly large enemies that could basically be stun locked over and over with an R1 combo. The Claymore's combo looks a lot like the longsword combo. It's just a bit slower, and it has a bit longer range. The Claymore is a very popular sword for builds that balance strength and dexterity. It has good requirements, a really good moveset that has slashes, thrusts, and vertical strikes, and it's very easy to enchant. The problem with it is you only get one of them per game, and it's here on this bridge, which makes it a little difficult to experiment with them. This build will be able to use the Claymore one-handed, and I may do so a few times, use it as a gimmick weapon or a flame weapon. But we're not really designed to make advantage of that, and we're going to have something that kind of makes up for it. Now here we are, heading up towards the Undead Burg boss. This is the area where you get to after you fight the Taurus Demon. And in fact, there's the fog door to the Taurus Demon, to the other side of the Taurus Demon's arena. But, as you'll see, there's no prompt there. We cannot go into the Taurus Demon's area through the back. The game simply does not allow it, which is odd because most fog doors the game does let you go through backwards, but for, I guess, boss reasons, this one you cannot. So there's no point right now in going that way because we cannot fight the Taurus Demon from the back, and I don't intend to because I want to save him for much, much later. We'll talk to Solaire. It's not uncommon, after you get the white soapstone from him, if you don't already have it, to just kill him now. You can get his armor and his talisman here, which some people like to do just for role-playing, faith builds, or if they want to make a Sunbro build, they just kill him so they have his armor. We're not going to do that yet because we don't really need to, and his equipment is not that great. His sword is a pretty good straight sword, but we won't need it right now, and there's always opportunities to kill Solaire later. Killing him is the only way to get his gear, but the game normally offers you a pretty decent opportunity to do so. This is a bit risky. I should probably be going up to the shortcut first, because I am underestimating how strong these dogs are and how difficult it is to hit them, even with a tight thrusting attack on stairs. Dog AI can be a little difficult. They can be very aggressive at times, and we don't have any poise at the moment, so that's going to stagger us a lot. In all honesty, I should have gone down to Darkroot Garden earlier and picked up the wolf ring there, which I will probably be doing after this. If I had done that, then we would have some poise, and these dogs would not be staggering us, and we can just pretty much slash them to death, because they don't actually do that much damage unless they're stagger locking you. Poise is really important, and something I never even noticed, because my first run of the game I was playing as a knight. And the knight actually has a lot of poise on his starting armor. It's pretty much the only class that has a significant amount of poise. The warrior has a tiny bit, enough to not get staggered by very light things. But the wanderer's armor doesn't have much poise, or any poise, and most starting sets don't. The result of that is that even a little bit of damage that you take will stagger you, which can be a real problem, because there's a lot of attacks that really shouldn't stagger you. And if you have even a little bit of poise, they won't. Now, I just whacked that Hollow Soldier's shield, and you notice I did not deflect. I did reduce damage to him, but I did not deflect off it. That's because he's using that cracked round shield, which has no deflection. Even though it is a perfectly functional shield, it cannot deflect. So you'll just bash on it, and the same thing would happen if you were using it. Ouch. What we're doing here is going down to see Griggs. It's actually possible to do a jump down into the Undead Burg, lower Undead Burg early, and get Griggs a different route just by going into the Undead Burg, the normal Undead Burg. Show where you can do that, although I won't do the jump because it's kind of pointless at this point. But you need the Residence Key to get him. Even if you have the Master Key, you cannot rescue Griggs without going in here. Hello. The reason why we want to rescue him is because, of course, we have a supposed sorcery build, and we want to actually become a sorcerer. So in order to do that, we're going to need to buy some sorceries. Rickert sells 1 copy of Soul Arrow, and he can also sell a Catalyst. But we can get a Catalyst for free off the Sorcerer starting set that's in the room with Griggs, and so there's no real reason to worry about that. The Sorcerer Catalyst is not really a particularly good Catalyst. If you have fairly high intelligence, it's okay, but there is a much better Catalyst which is available fairly early, although not necessarily easily, and we're going to go ahead and get that one first. But for now, we'll have the Sorcerer Catalyst, and it'll be marginally useful while we go. Back through the Burg. Now, why am I coming back here? I mean, there's not really anything better for me to do. I could kill the merchant to get an early Uchigatana, which is useful if you have dexterity builds, but killing him removes a source of arrows and Lloyd's talismans early in the game, something you might not want to have happen to you if you use those a lot. What we're doing, though, is we're going to trigger the Drake. Now, as I said, there is a trigger for the Drake that most people will not even notice, and that trigger is when you step out onto this bridge and the Drake lands here. If you do not see this event happen, the Drake will never show up at the bridge. This event is the trigger which causes the Drake to appear. So, once we go back up on top of the bridge, the Drake will now be here. If you don't go that way, which it's certainly possible to never need to go that way if you don't want to, you can make sure the Drake never shows up. However, we want to trigger him, because I am, of course, going to be going for the Drake Sword. I debated whether to actually bother doing this, or whether to leave my strength at 10, but the main rationale here is that otherwise I would have had to grind a lot for weapon improvements, and nobody wants to see that right now. I would have cut out the grinding, but it still would have been kind of pointless. Plus, I want to show off why the Drake Sword is really not as overrated as a lot of people say it is. Especially if you're early on, especially considering how easy it is to get. I think there's a sense of elitism with it, that you shouldn't need it. Zane called it a crutch, which for his challenge purposes, it is indeed a crutch, but obviously here we're using everything we can possibly get our hands on, so we don't care that much about that. Now, with the Drake, timing is everything. The tail sways, you just have to time when he lands, time the sway of the tail, and just shoot. Don't worry about shooting multiple times, it's really not worth it. Now, this is where feather arrows or large arrows can be really handy. The number of times you need to shoot the Drake's tail is not dependent on a specific number, but on a specific amount of damage dealt, and that's true of all tails. So if you wanted to actually shoot off his tail, the best thing to do, just slowly go through this in quick motion, is to slowly but surely pound away at the best ranged weapons you can. That's one reason why getting a longbow is nice here. It's got better range than the short bow in terms of damage drop-off. And we can use better arrows that we bought from the merchant. Although in this case, I'm not using my large arrows. I probably should have. It would have sped things up a bit. And it also helps to get a little closer. It may not seem like much, but just a few feet of standing can actually greatly alter the damage that you do at range. There's a ring that also improves bow range, but we can't really get it right now. It would be helpful, but it's not. Doing that gets us the Drake Sword, which is a one-handed sword. It's a straight sword, but it has more of a curved sword moveset. It does not have thrust, unlike the other swords. The main advantage to it is that it's a 200 physical damage sword at a time when pretty much the best you're going to get with scaling even is somewhere in the 130, 140 range. So the damage it does is considerable, and it comes out very quickly. You don't need high stats for it, and it also has this fun little R2 move with two-handed, shoot a shockwave. It's mostly a gimmick though, especially since it lowers your durability. Now, having said that, it's pretty nice, considering how easy it is to get. All you need is a bow and some arrows, and you can buy all of those, or find them from the longbow that's in Darkroot, and you don't have to do much of anything. Now, this part is entirely skippable. You don't have to do this. You could just start working on getting some shards in the parish, and then do a few tricks to get up to a +5, and then later a +10 weapon with minimal effort. But it takes fighting the Capra Demon to be able to make a +10 weapon. So there is that advantage of having the Drake Sword, at the very least, to fight the Capra Demon. Of course, there is something even more nasty you can do to fight the Capra Demon, but that's not the point. Now that the Drake is here, but with the gate open, we can go in here and make him disappear anytime we want by just walking into the Sunlight Altar area. He'll fly off because he doesn't want us shooting him from below. That's a lesson they learned well in Demon Souls, where you could stand underneath the blue dragon and just pretty much shoot him in the chin. You actually still can do this if you go out on that ledge near where the rats are, but you will have to be able to do enough damage with your bow and arrows to outdamage his regeneration, because he will go into a regeneration mode if he's being cheap-shotted. It is still possible to kill the Drake doing that, though. Speaking of which, you can also kill the Drake or cut off his tail in melee, and some people who are really good at the game use a two-handed weapon with a strong overhead strike, and they think that it's easier to actually cut the Drake's tail off by baiting it to land on the bridge, and then just running out there and doing a two-handed swipe to get its tail off. I'm not brave enough to do that, and I would probably just screw it up. That is actually a faster way, and arguably easier if you get it down. Now, the guy who closes the portcullis no longer respawns, so he's actually no longer going to cause trouble with this shortcut, which is good, because that was pretty annoying if you were going up to this shortcut and then the portcullis closed right in front of you. Kind of an annoying little thing to have happen. And we're just going to run back here towards Andre. The next step will be to explore a little bit of Darkroot Garden. There's a number of really great items in Darkroot Garden, and again, none of them require us to actually fight a boss. Although while you're here, you could fight the Moonlight Butterfly. It's very easy. And there's a summon spirit that you can use who can pretty much solo the boss for you. So it doesn't even matter if your build's not complete or if you don't really have much gear. But the only advantage to doing that is getting a Divine Ember and some souls. And the Moonlight Butterfly's soul, which is okay, but you can't use it to make a weapon right now, so unless you're planning to consume it, not that important. Warp down here to Andre's, needs to see that long run. And we've now got 16 strength and 14 dexterity, which is pretty much where we'll be staying on that for a while. We're going to work our intelligence up to 16. That will be essentially the bare bones necessity for this build, and I realize that sounds awfully low for a sorcery build. Don't worry, we will eventually be taking our intelligence up, but once we've actually gotten the core of the build, it's more important probably to get some endurance. I may skimp on vitality. I always regret doing that, but there's so many things that I want first that I usually do avoid too much vitality.